It's a 12-months-a-year job. But the end had to come sometime, and it came last fall in his 30th year as a coach. On the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, at the last football practice of the season, a man got out of his car and walked a little unsteadily to the players' bench at Ridley High School. He was bundled up warmly against the cold wind, and as he sat down, Joe McNicholas, who had been conducting the practice session, hurried over to him. For 15 minutes or so, the men talked while the players went through their drills half-heartedly, keeping only one eye on the ball and the other on the men talking on the bench. Soon, the older man put a big hand on McNicholas' shoulder and said he had to go. The cold was beginning to bother him. He got up slowly, walked to his car and got in, and the players began a mad rush to the car. Then, the man rolled down the window, mustered his fading strength, and in the manner that has made him a legend in his own lifetime, delivered a pep talk to the squad. He told them of the importance of the next day's game, the proud tradition they would bear, and the sacrifices they would have to make to win. He waved a farewell and the car was driven away. This was the last time Phil Marion, a man whose life was devoted to football and young men, would be in the atmosphere he loved above all others. Less than 2 months later, Phil Marion would be dead, his once powerful body wasted by a cancer that he took on, no holds barred, and battled ferociously for months. The man who had made kids test themselves against overwhelming odds for 3 generations was not lacking when his moment of truth came. In life, he was the epitome of excellence, of dedication, of sacrifice. In death, he was a symbol of courage. Phil put up a fantastic fight, his physician, Dr. John A. Ruffini, said. I don't know how many times I told the family the end could come within 24 or 48 hours. But he had this stamina, this heart that just wouldn't quit, that wouldn't accept that he was beaten. Did he know he wouldn't recover? Said Dr. Ruffini. Well, I'll tell you. Here you had a man of such pride and dignity, I didn't have the heart to tell him that he didn't have a chance. He had the right to fight it, to go out with dignity, and not as a hopeless case. Dignity and pride, that was Phil Marion to a T. He had it, and as a result his teams had it, and that is why, in an unparalleled coaching career that spanned 30 seasons, he had only 2 losing teams. Few coaches in the nation were as successful as Phil Marion, but this is not the story of a coach, it is the story of a man. He was a man, and because he was, his players were men too. That's why, year after year, Marion coach teams would go into game upon game, outweighed but never outfought, outnumbered but never outfoxed. Marion's last season started like 29 seasons before it. Phil in shorts, baseball cap, and bare-chested, greeting candidates under a searing August sun and demanding they begin with a 5-mile run. If you were going to be a dropout, Phil would rather you drop out the first day. He was a physically impressive man. He had a hand my hand never could properly grasp. Shaking hands with him was like trying to encircle a cement block. He wasn't very tall, but he had a massive chest and arms that made his average-sized legs appear small by comparison. It was during a preseason workout that Joe McNicholas, Phil's assistant for 18 years, knew something was wrong. After the first week, Mr. Marion was really pushing himself, McNicholas recalled. He would come into the locker room after the morning session really dragging. But then he'd go out in the afternoon as if nothing were wrong. Before our game with Radnor, he was as white as a sheet. He called me over and said he was too sick to talk to the players before the game. That had never happened before. I spoke to the team and told them Mr. Marion was ill. But by halftime he had recovered and delivered his usual pep talk. You'd never know anything was wrong with him. The players must have thought I was crazy. But eventually the pain got too much, even for the indestructible Phil Marion. I walked to his office one day when he wasn't expecting me, and Mr. Marion was sitting at his desk with tears in his eyes. The pain must have been unbearable, McNicholas said. A few days later, Mr. Marion called McNicholas over to his table in the school dining room and said he was going into the hospital until, as Phil said, they find out what's wrong with me. But I should be back by Wednesday or Thursday, he said, so you'll have to look after things until then. But Phil Marion never came back, except for that remarkable day before Thanksgiving when he left his sickbed to talk to his players one last time. He had coached his last game, delivered his last stirring locker room talk, bawled out his last erring player. But because of the battle he waged, he will continue to serve as an inspiration to young men. On a given day, he could get his kids playing football like they never played in their life, McNicholas said. He was a master at this. There's never been anyone like him. And he could chew out a kid 1 minute, and the next minute that kid would go through a wall for him. That's the true measure of Phil Marion's genius, not as a coach, but as a molder of men. A man who had the priceless gift to inspire people to do things they never dreamed they were capable of doing, to make them better than they thought they'd ever be. Because of his great pride, Mr. Marion didn't want any visitors other than his family during his stay at Taylor Hospital. And that is as it should be, for now we all can remember him as I do. I can still see Phil Marion at the start of a football game at Ridley High. Just before kickoff time, the squad trots down from the school and gathers at a gate at one end of the field. There, the captains hold a brief meeting, the squad gives a short cheer and claps their hands, then rushes onto the field. Trailing in their wake is Phil Marion and his assistants. The weather is crisp and Phil is wearing a green jacket, baggy green sweatpants, and a white baseball cap with green brim tilted low over his eye and jauntily to one side. And he strides to the fray with the majesty of royalty.